Hello and welcome back to No Bullshit. Today we're talking about the big Charlottesville story that happened over the weekend. A small college town in northern Virginia, Charlottesville saw its fair share of drama this last Friday and Saturday. There were protesters, counter-protesters, the cops, state police, and even the National Guard getting involved. Violence eventually broke out, resulting in dozens of injuries, and even 3 deaths, including one woman who was killed by a car that was rammed into a crowd of counter-protesters. Very tragic. And that's the biggest highlight of this troubled event. That's what everyone's talking about, so I want to start out by saying, of course, I condemn this violence. It was terrible. I condemn all violence, obviously. Hell, I'm not even that big on protests, unless the cause is so great it can't be avoided. But what was the initial cause of this event to begin with? I really don't think most people even know anymore. All the headlines are saying now is things like 3 dead after white nationalist rally in Charlottesville, or Charlottesville white nationalist rally blamed for 3 deaths, dozens of injuries, with little mention of the other players in these events. And with little context at all and misleading phrasing, the media appears to be trying to pin this on white supremacy, its favorite boogeyman. Hell, even the term white nationalist has become almost as bad as saying nigger or kike, according to the leftists. But blaming the alt-right, white nationalists, and white supremacists is just blatantly mischaracterizing the whole situation.
For our great Commonwealth in the city of Charlottesville, we know is now 3 fatalities today.
Even the governor of Virginia came out and made these claims in his press conference about this. We'll get back to that later, but first let's tell this whole story from the beginning. I guess I have to because no one else wants to break it down properly. At the center of this chaos is the statue of Robert E. Lee, which liberals have been trying to take down for years because they just can't get over slavery in the Civil War. Ironically, General Robert E. Lee, while leading the Confederates in the Civil War, was actually against slavery himself, but hey, expecting liberals to be consistent and to do their homework is like expecting your car to fly around like a helicopter. So in protest of this almost 100-year-old statue's removal, right-wing conservatives decided to hold a rally which they called Unite the Right. It's worth noting that they didn't call themselves Unite White Nationalists or Unite for White Supremacy. Sure, they very likely contained some or many nationalists or supremacists, but the rally was established simply for conservatives who wanted to keep the statue. That's it. The media and the commentators are the ones turning into white nationalists and white supremacists every chance they get. Fucking hacks. So Unite the Right set up their rally by the books. They got the permits, paid their fees, and coordinated with the officials and everything. By all accounts, this was going to be a peaceful, possibly productive demonstration. That is, until the counter-protesters showed up. Left-wingers, primarily Antifa and Black Lives Matter people, they're the ones who showed up at another group's event, intending to start trouble, which of course they did. But you will rarely hear a news report even mention their involvement, let alone the fact that Antifa and BLM didn't even have permission to be there. So they're the ones who started the violence and the chaos. Yet the majority of people talking about this want to blame Unite the Right, or as they call them, white nationalist supremacists. Think about it like this for a second. Say there was a group setting up a rally for their favorite sports team, the Los Angeles Rams football team. They do it by the books, buying the permits, and get there for their event, and boom, on the day of, a bunch of Raiders and 49ers fans show up unannounced and start fights with the Rams fans. They might not even call the Rams fans what they really are. They could call them Chargers fans or something totally different. So who do you blame for this shit show happening? The original rally starters who wanted a peaceful demonstration, or the other 2 teams who showed up starting fights with them? The answer is pretty clear to me. It's pretty clear to me that Antifa and Black Lives Matter started the fights and the riots in Charlottesville, most likely because of their anti-white racism. But ironically enough, the coverage of Charlottesville blames Unite the Right, slandering them with names like racist and white supremacists. It's just simply ridiculous. If you want to see it for yourself, take a look at this official response from the governor of Virginia himself.
Now let me start off first by thanking all of our law enforcement officials. This could have been a much worse day today. I want to thank our local law enforcement individuals. I want to thank the first responders. I want to thank all the state police, to the National Guard, and everybody else who was involved in today's activities.
I agree. The police did their best at trying to handle this chaotic event in Charlottesville, but it is worth noting that this could have all been prevented if the cops were able to keep the opposing groups separated properly. I mean, that's riot prevention 101. Antifa and BLM shouldn't have been close enough to Unite the Right to start these fights. They shouldn't have been across the street from one another. They should have been across town. Now, I'm not trying to blame the cops here. I would hardly ever do that except in the most extreme situations. It's not the cops' fault for the violence and casualties, of course. It's the violent people's fault. But if this were in a big city with more equipped police, like say New York City, they would have shut this shit down right away, and there wouldn't have been any deaths or as many injuries. So a big part of the reason this shit got out of hand was because it took place in a small college town like Charlottesville, which was either not equipped enough to handle it and or they didn't have the skills or the plan to contain it properly.
We planned for a long time for today's incidents. I also want to give a special thank you to the clergy who are here today.
Well, planning for a long time doesn't mean you planned it right. Obviously something went wrong. And what the hell do priests have to do with this shit?
I also want to thank those courageous UVA college students yesterday who last evening surrounded the statue of Thomas Jefferson to protect that statue.
Thomas Jefferson had slaves though, right? I mean, I don't usually bring that shit up. I usually hear liberals saying that. And I'm not one to bring up slavery here, but you'd think the lefties would have a bone to pick with Jefferson here, like they do with Robert E. Lee.
And I have a message to all the white supremacists and the Nazis who came into Charlottesville today. Our message is plain and simple. Go home.
Who's to say none of these supposed white supremacists are from Virginia or even Charlottesville themselves? I've never been to Virginia, but I hear there's a lot of good old boys there that would definitely be classified as supremacists by these ridiculous standards in the media. This governor is clearly full of shit. He wants us to think that all these bad people came from out of state, which some did, sure, probably many, but to act like Virginia didn't do nothing is just plain silly.
You are not wanted in this great Commonwealth. Shame on you. You pretend that you're patriots, but you are anything but a patriot. You want to talk about patriots, talk about Thomas Jefferson and George Washington, who brought our country together.
Here's a little history lesson for you, jackass. The Revolutionary War didn't really bring our country together. Not exactly. In fact, it kind of tore our country apart in a lot of the same ways the Civil War did, and kind of like how this Charlottesville incident is doing right now. When Washington led the Americans in the Revolutionary War, that was effectively a rebellion from British rule. And when you consider the high percentage of Americans who wanted to remain loyal with Britain during the war, blindly saying Washington united us is just plain naive and borderline retarded.
You think about the patriots today, the young men and women who are wearing the cloth of our country. Somewhere around the globe, they are putting their life in danger. They're patriots. You are not.
How about this, Virginia Slim? You're the one who's not a fucking patriot. Not once in this speech does he even mention Antifa or Black Lives Matter, let alone condemn them for starting the riots and violence in the first place. If they hadn't shown up starting fights, none of this disaster would have happened. But hey, that doesn't fit the narrative, I guess. Think about it like this. Has anyone in the news or media ever condemned anything Antifa or BLM has done? Seems like they just try and write it off to me. That or they promote these hate groups as noble causes to be adored. Hell, last year President Obama had Black Lives Matter guests in the fucking White House, even though just a few months before, their group inspired the assassination of innocent police officers in Dallas. But the media already forgot about that. Nah, let's not talk about that anymore. That makes them look bad. Now back to today. The media has been hounding Trump to condemn the violence in Virginia, even though he already has multiple times on Twitter. The pundits and the critics still say he hasn't done enough to distance himself from the supposed white supremacy, which really equates to them wanting Trump to distance himself from white people. It's fucking absurd, especially when they just gave Obama a free pass. And these double standards on the left don't end there. One asshole Unite the Right member decides to run his car into the crowd, and the media tries to cast that onto the whole damn group. They're all white nationalists now, violent murderers according to them. But if you try and do the same thing with one of their preferred groups like Antifa, Black Lives Matter, or even Islam, then you better back the fuck down. One Muslim terrorist driving a car into innocent people in France doesn't represent the whole of Islam now for the leftists, because you know, they are fucking hypocrites. If you don't believe me, well, you should, because I'm always fucking right. But you know what, just for fun, let me show you this double standard in two different press conferences. We already saw some of this Virginia governor here condemning white supremacists, saying they should shut up and get out of his state. Now let's see what another press conference has to say about Black Lives Matter.
I worked with the police and instructed them to do everything that they could to make sure that the protesters were able to exercise their right to free speech. It's a very delicate balancing act, because while we tried to make sure that they were protected from the cars and the other things that were going on, we also gave those who wished to destroy space to do that as well.
So not only is BLM allowed to speak and rally for their black supremacist cause, they're also allowed to destroy property. What the fuck? This bitch is practically encouraging it. In the end, white people just can't win here. Not in this day and age in America. They organize their rally and set up everything by the book, but Antifa and Black Lives Matter come and start shit. And then everyone blames Unite the Right, calling all white people racist, white nationalists, and supremacist even. Hell, the governor doesn't even want them to have their freedom of speech anymore. He wants to kick white people out of the whole goddamn state. Meanwhile, actual black supremacists on the other hand, not fake ones, actual black supremacists are given free passes to assemble illegally, start violence illegally, and even cause mayhem. Hell, this lady from Baltimore even said they're allowed to destroy property without repercussions. It's fucking ludicrous. So again, I'm not trying to condone any of the violence on either side. I'm still starkly against it, but the real story here needs to be told. Sure, it may sound like I'm defending the radical right-wing white supremacists the media has been bashing all weekend, and well, in a way, I kinda am. The thing is, they're not even really all white supremacists, or even nationalists. They're just conservatives. All we really know about Unite the Right is they're a group of right-leaning activists who wanted to protest the taking down of a 100-year-old statue of Robert E. Lee. That, and they started their event legally, with permits, and were eventually shut down because Antifa and Black Lives Matter showed up illegally, starting fights and riots. The real story here is the mainstream media and its handling of this situation, and the way they reported it, the way they so easily label conservatives as guilty racist instigators, while at the same time supporting liberals and calling them all innocent, writing off all their wrongdoings, if they even mention them at all. This double standard is the real story here, and it's simply bullshit through and through. What do you guys think? Was Unite the Right white nationalists and supremacists looking for trouble, or did Antifa and Black Lives Matter show up looking to fight? Could the police maybe have handled this better? And is the mainstream media coverage being fair? Comment below, and thanks for watching No Bullshit. See y'all next time. And in light of these new troubling developments, I highly suggest you guys join and follow my backup accounts, since the possibility of YouTube shutting me down is higher now than ever. Right now my Patreon page is my official backup page, and you can follow me on Twitter for updates. I know the Patreon costs $1 a month, but it's really the only way we can stay independent here on the channel, free from Google's tyrannical reign. Please consider joining there if you want to make sure this show stays afloat in the future. I've already posted some of my deleted videos on the page, and I will continue to update people on Patreon and Twitter should the worst happen, God forbid. Thanks again for watching No Bullshit. One more thing, I want to give a special thanks to these amazing Patreon supporters. You guys are the best. You guys went above and beyond the rest, and I love you so much for it. If anyone else wants to donate or join our Patreon crew, link in the description. Thanks again.
As I say, we have men and women fighting for this country today who are fighting for our freedoms and our liberties. This has got to stop. We got to bring people together.
Governor, does that include Antifa?
Today that these white supremacists and these Nazis would come into our state to hurt our people is unacceptable. But I can tell you this, we are stronger for it. We will not tolerate it. They do not know who we are, and we're not going to stand by.
Governor, I think a lot of us...
Antifa. What about the Governor, and you condemn Antifa as well?
Chief, can you tell us who the suspect is?